Hello, everybody. Welcome to Narrative Live on a Thursday. Got to get used to saying that. It's good to be with you tonight. We had a show planned around Elon Musk, and we just had to postpone that. There's so much going on with the Uvalde school shooting, so many new questions being asked about that shooting and what really transpired after the gunman entered that building and took 19 lives. We were going to be exploring that tonight in great detail with Eric Garland. Eric, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great.
So it's a grim story, of course, and it's never easy to discuss these things. And yet there are so many questions tonight, primarily around what may have happened in those initial moments when the gunman entered the building. It seems that he was allowed to enter the building unobstructed, and for an hour, maybe an hour, that's what they say. He wasn't shot at or interfered in. There was some shooting at the beginning, perhaps, but nothing towards the end of the hour. It's quite a dramatic set of details that is now emerging that basically puts into question all the initial information we initially got from police around what was going on at the Uvalde school. It also really questions the response time, the police action, and also the lack of reaction for a long period of time, because the gunman first rode up to the school, and we have a little map here we can show you of what the school looks like from above, and you can get a sense that this is quite a openly sparse area. This is not an urban area by any stretch of the imagination. This is sorry, taking me a little moment here to set it up for us. There you go. So this is the view from Google Map, and what we're looking at here is, a very, very sparse open area. So you could really see what was going on. It's not like the kind of thing where, there's a lot of buildings, people are hiding, there's lots of cars, lots of people. You would really just be able to see what was going on. So he pulls up in his vehicle to, I believe on the, here, there's a little ditch, and we'll see a photo to confirm this in a second, right over here. You can't see my mouse, I don't think, but there's a little ditch next to the street over here. He pulls up his car, shoots across the street to what I think is this, which is the funeral home. So there's shots being fired at a funeral home. 2 eyewitnesses there see him, which obviously means there may have been some sort of, some people may have called or at least alerted police right at that point that there's a gunman here. This is a real gunman. Then he goes unobstructed for 12 minutes or so, maybe even longer, all the way into the building itself. Then he gets into a classroom. Then he does the shooting. Most of the shooting happens at the beginning, and then he goes off to we don't know where, because he was waiting there, I guess, for an hour until the police finally came in. There were people outside, worried parents outside, trying to figure out why nothing was being done. We have video of that. But first I want to let you hear from the sheriff, who was quite revealing in what they knew about what was going on and how little they knew when they had to do a press conference. And I'd say the press conference today was done in a hurry. It seemed to me like it was one of those things they were doing because there was suddenly an indication from people that there were lots of questions around the police reaction. So they threw together this press conference. This is what he had to say.
So at this time, no, there was not an officer readily available armed. No.
Could anybody have gone there sooner? You gotta understand, it's a small town. You have people from Eagle Pass, from Del Rio, Laredo, San Antonio responding to a small community. According to the information I have, he went in at 11:40. He walks, and I'm going to approximate 20 feet, 30 feet. He makes a right. He walks into the hallway. He makes a right, walks another 20 feet. Turns left into a schoolroom, into a classroom that has doors open in the middle. Officers are there, the initial officers, they receive gunfire. They don't make entry initially because of the gunfire they're receiving. But we have officers calling for additional resources. Everybody that's in the area, tactical teams, we need equipment, we need specialty equipment, we need body armor, we need precision riflemen, negotiators. So during that time that they're making those calls to bring in help to solve this problem and stop it immediately, they're also evacuating personnel, not say personnel, students, teachers, There's a lot going on.
But that wasn't really what was going on. In fact, it seems to me that there was no evacuation of students. Maybe we haven't seen those details yet, but most of what was going on was people being told not to go in. And you had some questions around the actual Border Patrol team that came in at the very end to finally take down the gunman. So maybe you can explain what your concerns are around that.
Well, I got a bunch of thoughts. First of all, I think we should disperse with the notion of good guy with a gun. That was never an operable concept, but there were what he just said there is, well, the officers were taking fire from the gunman.
Yeah, that's what he said.
That's what he said, but I'd be interested in looking at the tactical positioning of that. Like, where were the weapons discharged? In what direction? How many rounds were fired? How many were recovered? I mean, that's what you have FBI teams for forensics and whatnot. The sheriff had...
But it's a question. Let me interrupt you there for just asking about AR-15s, because they did say that an AR-15 could shoot through cinder block. That may be true, but that would be the only way. That's the way they would be taking fire. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're rounds with an extraordinary amount of velocity behind them because the cartridges and but so yes, it is powerful, and those I don't know about piercing straight through cinder block or what the trajectory would be after that. Those are some interesting questions. It would depend on the construction material. Again, now you're in FBI forensic analysis territory, but they're saying, well, they would have taken him down. They were there, but they would have taken the bad guy down, but they were taking, enfilading or deflating fire. This sort of takes out the whole notion of a good guy with a gun. I mean, that's always been a stupid concept that is, really running interference for the gun manufacturers who want to make a bunch of money selling weapons to the drug cartels. That's what this is about, by the way. So just get that out to the audience. This is not about gun control for U.S. citizens. This is about the amount of money that can be made selling weapons that eventually walk out the door and get loaded on container ships and get sent to Venezuela and Honduras and to cocaine smugglers and to human traffickers who want the guns. And so all this stuff about a good guy with a gun and you have to put up with endless numbers of domestic terrorist attacks. It's all bullshit. That's not what this is about. This is about money. Yeah, and to a degree, domestic terrorism.
That's. I mean, you're not suggesting that the GOP is in cahoots with the cartels, or are you saying that?
Well, I don't know. We already found out in 2016 that they took a bunch of money as a straw donor for the Russian mob out of Barcelona with Alexander Torshin and that redhead there, Maria Butina.
Yeah,
right?
That was a narrative story. Then we broke that story. It was a big deal that happened. Then that the Russians were in fact funding the NRA through these two people from Russia. I mean, it's what were they doing? Part of the national, the Rifle Association of America. They don't even have a rifle association there because, they do now actually. They try to copy the NRA, but they aren't allowed to carry weapons there.
They should have sent them at Ukraine. Maybe they would have done better than they did.
Yeah, maybe. The interesting thing here for me is that the Border Patrol was needed to call in. I mean, there's lots of police officers there right at the beginning. And there's pandemonium at the beginning, actually, when we first see the parents outside trying to get in. And there are police officers there. They're just not going into the school. I mean, I get that this is a active school situation. I get that. And there's an active shooter there. And I get that is dangerous. But if you're a policeman and you've got weapons and your community's school kids are being killed in cold blood inside your school, don't you go in? I mean, do you not go ahead and make an effort to try and get in?
Yeah, that's your moment.
Right.
And
that's
by
what
the
you
way,
do.
In terms of other statistics, if you go to the Department of Labor and you look by job code, and you look at morbidity and mortality statistics, police officers, even if you add in not just the danger from being harmed by potential suspects, but also traffic accidents, which is about 50% of the injuries and deaths on the job. People doing traffic cop work or being hit while they're driving around because these guys drive 8 hours a day. They have the same morbidity and mortality as bartenders. Look it up. Department of
Really?
Labor.
Really?
Police officers in the United States have no more danger at work than a barback at your local pub. That's the stats. You can go check them out. They are airtight, and they are. I mean, you want to talk about a dangerous job? Fisherman.
Oh, the
Roofer?
bartending was a dangerous job, but fisherman's more dangerous.
Wait, like 5 times more dangerous. Actually, fisherman's like 9 times as dangerous. Loggers 9 times as dangerous. I think roofers are 5. Farmers are twice as dangerous as cops. Combines and all that stuff, and
What's about journalism? Does that qualify as a dangerous profession?
only when you're mouthy like us.
Yes, thank you. Which yes, sometimes we could be a little mouthy. So,
But
the question
back to your point, though, why did these guys not run in? Dude, you're on. This is your gig. So, and why did we need to wait for Border Patrol, who are federal officers? Do they even have the remit for that? And they
that
didn't.
claims
And the
small town. But I mean, small town. There's policemen there. Look, there's pictures of local police there. Surely there's a way for people to get to the school. I mean, it just seems unusual to me that it would take so long, to wait for that time. And I get that it takes a long time for this extra force to get there. But you're a policeman. This is your school. Don't you just do everything you can possibly do to try to get to it? I mean, it seems remarkable to me that it took so long. I'm trying to find where the border is here on this map, by the way. So maybe you can help me do that as we figure this out. How far they are from the border. So
they're south by southwest of San Antonio, and they are not far from the Mexican border.
right.
So yeah, but again, to go back to look, we don't have the information. I don't want to go and second guess people who are in a situation that I was not there to witness. The notion of 2 or 3 guys who are nominally trained to handle such situations, who are carrying firearms. Yes, the AR-15 is a terrible weapon of war. Why it's available to so many American citizens, I guess we need to revisit. But 2 or 3 guys, closing on an 18-year-old with no tactical training. I mean,
yeah. And there's also this giant 12-minute gap at the beginning. I mean, he comes to that location that we showed you earlier, but we'll show you in another picture here where it is in the actual photo of the car crashed into a ditch. I mean, it's quite dramatic. It's not like parked the car. He crashed into a ditch, comes out, sees 2 people looking at him, shoots at them. So, I mean, you've got this. So immediately people must have called 911. I mean, it's not like you would just be hanging out and letting that happen. So you've got, then it takes time to get from there in, as the sheriff there was describing it takes time to get from there into the school. This is him walking towards the school building. I mean, and then he gets into the school, and then he gets into a classroom. So there's several steps. Then he does some shooting, and then, kills the children and the 2 teachers. And only then does he, I don't know what happens for the rest of that hour. Why it took an hour? I have no idea why it took an hour. It would be
an hour is a long time in an event like that.
Yeah, it's very suspicious. It's very suspect. I mean, it could be any number of reasons. I'm sure we'll find out why. There are reasons, and I'm sure they had to secure the perimeter, as they said. But we know it was, I mean, maybe they didn't know at the time that it was one gunman, but it didn't. He put this on Facebook. He said on Facebook and social media that this is what he was doing. He'd shot his grandmother. He was going to go shoot people at the school. This is not someone who was trying to surprise people by this attack. I think he was trying to alert people he was doing this attack. Which I don't understand. Like, I don't understand the mental mechanics of all of that and how that works. And I also don't understand, what would trigger someone like this to go and do that. I mean, that to me is the really important question here. Is why in America, we keep seeing this question over and over again. Why in America do we have these shootings? It does not happen anywhere else in the world where there are just as many guns, and maybe not AR-15s, but there certainly are guns. But it does not happen. And where it has happened, there's always immediate action to stop it, and it ends. So the question we have to ask is, why is it happening with this great frequency in America? And the answer always is there's a lot of guns. Sure, there's a lot of guns, but it's still strange to me that people are finding themselves only in one country in the world triggered to go and shoot up shopping centers and schools, and it does, like, they're the same people as who live everywhere else in the world. Why are they in the United States finding the urge to go and buy AR-15s, and only in the United States, and then shoot up shopping malls and schools? It just doesn't make sense to me.
And both the prevalence of guns and mental illness argument falls flat. This is something I've done a lot of research on for many, many years. Even going so far as doing spreadsheets and downloads and comparing countries and whatnot. And if you want a control group here about, like, okay, well, there's just lots of guns and that'll just happen, or evil and or mental illness. Well, one of the most armed places in the United States, if not the number one most armed place per capita in the United States, is the state of Vermont, where I hail from. And I always love to tell the story, and I'll tell it again. When we talk about guns in schools, when I was a kid, you can come to about first week in November. The accent's probably going to come out, so don't, everyone from home is going to know. I'm keeping it real. Well, first week in November, Buck. No, I mean, I'm putting on the other accent. This is my actual accent. But first week in November, Buck season kicks off, and and people will. I went to a very rural high school. People would bring their guns to school because they were going to literally, some of them were going to walk out the back of the high school right up into the mountains to go hunting.
Yeah.
Others would go to other parts of town or to some other non-posted land with the dwindling daylight in the first week of November. And as such, they would, you want to practice gun safety, so you ain't going to leave it in the truck. You might leave your ammo in the truck, but you're going to take the gun away and you bring the gun into school, and they would hand the gun in at the front office, and the office manager would check and make sure that there wasn't a round in the chamber, and run and go back, and there was a pile of weaponry in the principal's office.
Wow. Do they still do that today? They don't do that today, presumably.
Columbine changed that, but we never had any trouble with it because we have the lowest crime in America. One of the reasons is that we have no money in Vermont, and so there's really no reason to rob anyone or be upset with anybody else because they're just as poor as you. And if you got something that didn't belong to you, everyone's going to know about it. So very small place, not a lot of money. So there's that. But also, everyone's armed to the teeth, so they might shoot you in the face if you come to their house,
right,
or elsewhere. So everyone's very polite. Also, there's a lot of mental illness, unhealthy relationships between Vermonters and farm animals, unfortunately. In other words, there's crazy people and tons of guns, and yet we haven't had a single school shooting. And, back in my day, we brought, every fall, people brought guns into school and did not shoot anybody.
Yeah.
Much less, come in with military hardware.
Yeah. They left the schools to go hunting, and they had the weapons with them when they left and when they arrived, and they didn't shoot people. So why are they shooting people now? Why is this happening?
Yeah, that's the question I'm really getting.
We have crazy people in Canada too, by the way. Lots of crazy people, lots of guns.
And you get guns in Canada too, and Alberta,
shootings.
Northern Ontario, and whatnot. But there have been a couple, but not seriously. Look, if you get a bag full of shotgun shells and a double barrel shotgun, so we're not talking about the AR-15, although that's was designed as a replacement for the M16. Mm-hmm. And the the designer of the AR-15 said he never intended it in civilian hands because it's a weapon of war. It is a weapon that is intended to, produce, prejudicial, lethal violence to the human body. It was designed for soldiers, and that's what it does best. But it, you can do bad stuff with hunting equipment too. This isn't really hunting equipment, like shotguns. If you had a bag of shotgun shells, you could you could reload those pretty quick.
Yeah.
And take out a whole bunch of fifth graders. That's what's going on here. But they keep showing up with this AR-15.
At every single shooting, at every single mass shooting, it's AR-15s. It seems like all the list of the biggest shootings are AR-15s, which is also an unusual thing. You would think it's really, you look at patterns. I mean, you just wonder, like, how come all the mass shootings all have AR-15s? It's just weird.
Why not Desert Eagle, .50s? I mean, why not, Dirty Harry style 45 calibers? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that can induce a lot of damage, but it's always that particular.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's always that weapon, and then you get these. It's funny. We have this pattern when you're talking about the cops that are hanging outside
Hmm.
of the school. That reminded me of Parkland quite a bit.
Very much like Parkland. Very much like
Remember,
Parkland.
you had a local sheriff there named Scott Israel, who I believe was tied to Roger Stone, and I think employed one of Roger Stone's family members.
Hmm.
And I think it was his deputies who were outside Parkland, and again, they sat around while Nicholas Cruz, the shooter, shot the place up and didn't do much. And then CNN was on the spot to show Scott Israel going around giving condolences to all the victims who survived, and Roger Stone's name never came up. And we were all left reeling, much like we are
The
now.
Florida gay club shooting, the Pulse nightclub. We had one of the survivors on the show a few weeks ago. Also, it took a long time for police to step inside. People were trapped inside in the washrooms for a long period of time as the gunman was still killing people. And we still don't have answers to one of the biggest, if not the biggest, mass shooting in U.S. history, which took place at that in Vegas, the country music concert in Vegas, right at the beginning of the Trump presidency. Now, you investigate that story, and it becomes, there's not a lot of stories I've not published because it's just, you look at the results of your investigation, you think, well, that might kill you. And that's one of those stories where the findings are a little bit dangerous. And it's not what you think. It's not just a crazy person shooting at ordinary civilians. It's an organized crime event.
Blowing through construction grade glass and then shooting with a weapon that shouldn't be able to shoot in as tight a pattern as it did, according to some of the tactical combat experts I spoke with. Yeah. And then, what was it? Barry Diller from IEC / the Daily Beast, buys into MGM casinos as soon, right around that time. And then again, once the settlement's done, that's kind of weird.
They sold the hotel chain right after that, didn't they? I think they did. And then, there's all sorts of interesting iconography that happened, regarding the Sphinx that's there. There's all sort of mythical sort of idea explanations why this shooting took place. In addition, for it just being an odd thing for a shooting to happen at a concert for country music. I mean, it's not, it's just not your typical thing for someone to do just as an ad hoc personal thing. You would do it because you wanted to create panic and fear and see a result come out of it.
And chronologically, that was around the time that the Senate Intelligence Committee was starting hearings that had a lot more teeth in them than the House Intel. And while the FBI was in some chaos post Comey's firing, and right around the congressional hearings kicking up, that event took place.
Right. And yet here we are again with 2 shootings in 1 month taking place at a time when, again, there's a lot of other news going on in the world. You'd be amazed at how much news is not being reported right now. Ukraine, Jan 6th, you name it. There's a lot of stories out there that are not making it to people's attention because all our attention is on one story, or 2 stories in this case, Buffalo, and then this story. And that's, I'm not going to put assigning blame or anything, but I think it is, you can't ignore that these shootings always seem to happen at specific times to sort of, overflood or flood the news cycle with this story.
And they don't just flood the news cycle, they also flood the neurotransmitters, right? There's nothing as precious to people as their children or children in general. And when you're talking about some horrid graphic story and grieving parents and whatnot, it eclipses all the other things you might want to think about. And, in other words, well, if it were a malign activity, if people did try and do this in order to traumatize Americans so they couldn't think as much, well, this would be a great way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I've been watching every anchor on news is everyone's in tears for the last few days. I've actually never seen this. I mean, maybe it happened at Sandy Hook, but I've never seen American anchors break down in every news show on TV. People are just traumatized by these events. They just can't understand it. This doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute, and it just speaks to their powerlessness in a system where it seems so obvious you do something about this, right? You would want to do something about this if you're a politician. It just makes sense. And then on top of that, the fact that the NRA conference is this week in Houston. I mean, yeah, we learned a long time ago there are no such things as coincidences in the world anymore, and it certainly seems like this is just, this is coincidental, but it sure might have other reasons as well that it might be happening.
There's correlation and causation. That second one is a lot harder to get to. However, I mean, we have the January 6th hearings are coming up, and by every report that we've heard kind of in advance, this is going to be a big deal. There's going to be some revelations. My understanding is that we're going to hear about just how scary and bad the treason was, that it really was the death of democracy that was intended. And, I get the sense that it's going to change America permanently. And by change America, it seems like the hostile foreign influences and the hostile organized crime influences around here that are America's two greatest problems are going to be blamed for some of what happened and are going to be rolled back significantly. That's a lot of money at stake and a lot of national interest at stake. And some of the people probably don't want that to happen. So there may be motive to create as much havoc in the United States as possible, where, gas is $5-6 a gallon, where, certain types of baby formula are, is suddenly, missing. Yeah. They got to rocket stuff in from the Nestle company, which is interesting after they got busted for having all that cocaine in the Nespresso factory. I'm looking forward to a follow-up story on that, because that'll be
interesting. And the story that people are not hearing about is SCOTUS and the scandal in SCOTUS. And we've had that was a massive scandal, and it just disappeared.
I'm not trying to be a jackass. Yeah. Which one?
Well, there's the two. I mean, one is the leaking of the abortion report or this, which we're still waiting to see what the actual opinion is. And the other one is the Ginny Thomas scandal around Clarence Thomas, but they also all are the same scandal, because one is January 6th and the other one is it's all part of the same concern around Thomas and Alito being subject to other people's needs or demands. I mean, that seems to be what we're seeing. We've got some justices that are not purely independent and not acting independently. So
and that's the whole reason we say, hey, yo, you have this job forever, so you can just use your best judgment. And there's like 9 of you, so we're picking the smartest 9 people in the country, and you do not need to, collect.
Don't have to worry about a thing. You have to worry about a thing later for the rest of your life.
It's supposed to be a pure, wise counsel, and of course the American experiment is based upon the 3 types of government that the founding fathers knew about and knew all their flaws and wanted to play them off against each other. And that was the wise counsel of Judaic tradition and pure democracy of the Greeks and European monarchy, and to, triangulate those against each other. Pretty clever, I think.
That is pretty clever. I didn't know that. That's really interesting.
Oh,
and so there's lots of news that we could be reporting on today, and yet here we are talking about Uvalde and then now the school massacre, and then just to take us back to the Buffalo massacre, it's the one that we didn't really cover. There was this brief moment in the news cycle that everything was being blamed on the Azov regiment, because this guy had mentioned the Azov regiment in his manifesto. Firstly, I don't know why in this case we don't have the manifesto yet. I'm waiting for it to arrive, but it's in every mass shooting. There's always the same pattern again. You've got these manifestos that show up. Some of them are exactly the same manifesto, like they just copy and paste from other mass shootings, add some things. In Buffalo, they added the Azov regiment, which everyone quickly said, well, of course he's not supporting the Azov regiment. But I was like, how did the Azov regiment even get in there? Because that would be something
I missed this. Yeah. How did that get in?
Well, that's the question. I mean, you think about why the only people who'd be really, I don't know, in America, I'm sure there's lots of people who are aware of the Azov regiment, but they would not be activated to do a shooting or anything related to that, or mentioning it in a manifesto, unless, I don't know, you were triggered by something that made you do that. It just seems unusual to me that that was in the manifesto. And it was, it's not saying that there was a link, but who would benefit from there being an Azov regiment mentioned in that? Who would benefit from something like that?
I mean, right? I mean, it's funny. I'm not saying that this is a Russian op, but when you had the base, what was it called? The base. Rinaldo Azzari was like Italian dude's name. I forget if it was Atomwaffen Division or the base that was going to do domestic terrorism. And when they got busted, he went to where? Moscow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where white nationalism comes from. It's where white supremacism comes from. That's where they decide, the rebirth of white supremacism comes from. It's where also, by the way, the anti-gay movement comes from. It's the family, focus on the family movement comes from Moscow. That's where they came up with that idea. There's just these trends that you're looking at.
You mean the Kremlin?
The Kremlin. I mean the Kremlin, where they actually threw the party for the focus on the family convention when they had it in 2013 at the Kremlin. There's a real possibility we're at war. We're at war with Russia. It's maybe not directly at war with Russia, but we're at war with Russia, and you can't divorce the fact that we're sending in our weapons, our military support, and our military intelligence to a war zone against Russia. And it certainly would. When you look at the news in the last few days, you haven't heard very much about Ukraine, have you? Even though the Russians are actually doing much better now in Ukraine, interestingly enough, less pressure. Yeah, they are. In the Donbass region, they're now aggressively taking the Donbass region, and there isn't much of a reaction because the weapons haven't arrived yet for Ukraine. Now, you could argue that if there was more news attention on that, there might be more weapons arriving at a quicker pace. I don't know. There's all good questions.
We all got to be careful about tactical military intelligence without a security clearance, because the real stuff is that someone else has got that right now.
Yeah, and look, I'm sure the weapons are there, and I'm sure the Ukrainians can do whatever they need to. But the truth is that the last couple of days we've seen a huge offensive by the Russians.
Now, I had heard that they would raise the conscript age to 44. And I'm north of that border now, and I got to tell you, if you wanted me to be an infantryman, just give it up, dude. This is not going to go well.
The life expectancy of the average Russian male is 54, so 44 is late in a life cycle. I'm just it's low. You mentioned the other thing is the food prices and famine, and yesterday, maybe even today, Russia introduced a deal, a proposal to the United Nations that they would help the world with its famine and the food supply shortage in exchange for the dropping of sanctions against them. So, as we were discussing a few weeks ago, blackmailing the world into, well, we're going to, we'll feed you if you drop the sanctions, if you'll allow us to continue to be who we are. And so it's not that these shortages aren't affecting us; they're affecting us. The war is affecting us in many, many ways.
Yeah, but there's also some people taking some profits right now, because that's a narrative that'll fly. So it'll be interesting to see, who gets hit with antitrust charges and price fixing charges for price gouging over this. Because remember, a lot of these are grain futures. Hold on, this war, it's only May here. We're not to harvest yet. Now, are we, Ducharme? No. Sorry, we're bringing up another topic. My accent's going to come out. So what? This thing starts in February, right? They start shooting in February. It's still, winter. Yeah. So planting season was only about 2-3 weeks ago, wasn't it?
I don't know enough about what you're talking about, but I believe you.
You don't know when planting starts?
I don't know when planting starts, especially because I grew up in the South, in the Southern Hemisphere, where it's all
very south.
It's just very, very, very south and very, very opposite. So, but I would say the planting season must be, in now-ish.
Zev is very clearly an effete cosmopolitan liberal type who doesn't even know where to end up plant.
Well, I mean, I would be if the apocalypse comes, I'm screwed. I'm not there to survive. So
I note that when I talked about my rural background, I involved intimate relationships with barnyard animals, so don't feel bad that you've avoided this. This is
Okay.
just other information.
I just don't want to hear about your intimate relations.
Not mine. I didn't say mine.
Okay, but some people's or some people's.
Some people's is,
the image.
3 in my high school before we were out. That's actually true. Anyhow,
Oh my
that wasn't
gosh.
what I came on to.
Yeah, it's very different. Very different.
It's very. But anyhow, you don't plant till spring, and then
Right.
that grain don't come up till fall and late summer, right?
But there's grain silos full of grain that is not moving from Ukraine. They're just rotting in Ukraine because the Russians won't let it out. And so Africa is going to be facing extreme starvation because that's a lot of where the grain supplies are going to.
But is that why like Fruit Loops are $6 at my grocery store? Because that again, you're talking about supplies and supply chains that takes more time than that. So
Probably
I'm wondering.
not. Maybe it's still going to happen. I don't know. The fuel increases is the oil increases is what's causing the Fruit Loops to go up. I mean, the transportation of everything, the cost of driving a car, the cost of doing any of the things that we're used to doing has just gone up a lot because of the war again.
That's the story about it. But is that a reason for a 42% increase in like English muffin prices?
No.
I mean, I think
price
there's
gouging.
a lot
That's
of people.
price gouging. This is just people on purpose creating an inflationary cycle. And
So that has nothing to do with the geopolitics of it. Because
also
there are
the
things that go up.
geopolitics, but also the geopolitics. You add all these things together. I mean, there is an oil problem because we've got an oil embargo, so some of the oil pricing is different. There is some of that, but grain isn't getting to market. That's also true. But absolutely, I think what's going on in America, this inflation cycle, is constructed. We have so few companies that can control this, and
We have so few companies. There we go. When you don't really have a market, this is the problem, and this is one of the greatest things about the Biden administration. It's one of the dorkiest, and maybe people won't talk about it for 20 years. The revival of the antitrust division at the Department of Justice is so good. It's like
important.
there are so many industries where when you get down to oligopoly, not necessarily monopoly, but oligopoly and oligopsony, which is oligopoly is a limited number of sellers. Oligopsony is a limited number of buyers. When you get there, competitive dynamics change and not for the more healthy side. And, you have companies that line more up with they are more synonymous with the nation state that they represent, whether it's the one in the country they're in or not. So you can have for-profit companies that are perhaps beholden to nation states, not where their headquarters is. I think America has at least a couple of those.
I think a fair amount of those. Yeah.
And when you have 17 or 23 companies that are all innovating different products and projects and investments, then if somebody somebody gets in bed with Beijing or somebody gets in bed with the Sinaloa cartel or something weird, well, then that's their problem. And then you've got dynamics. This is where my industry, competitive intelligence, came from, is looking at the dynamics of all those different players. But when you get it down to 2 or 3 companies, there's not as much to look at in a traditional competitive strategy sense of like Harvard Business School, 1980, Michael Porter theory of business competition. And you get this weird hybrid of like this is the will of nation states. And these companies are tools of those nation states, and they act in different ways when there's only 2 or 3 of them. And let's say their fate is tied in with some bad guys. Maybe they might want to cause some chaos of their own to make you think that perhaps the current political regime that is bringing back the antitrust division, the civil rights section, the SEC, NATO, right? Old school stuff, NATO, that they want to psychologically impose on people and go, a lot of people aren't going to track it, but it's like, yeah, there's all this stuff happening and I don't like it because, it cost me a lot of money to fill up the car. I went to the grocery store. I felt disturbed. I came home. I saw a bunch of kids were shot, and you just feel bad about this. And, maybe you're thinking that you can affect the voting in the midterm election or the next presidential election, because the average person just felt ugly about ugly stuff. That's not something you can pull off in the marketplace when there's like 30 companies competing. They're too busy competing. But if there's like two,
you can do it. I mean, it's, and it all comes down to the GOP. I tweeted something yesterday about the fact that, you can't expect the GOP to change because they've already sold out to Beijing and Riyadh and, and Moscow. And they will not make it easier for people. They'll make it more difficult for people to get guns because that's not it's in the interest of Moscow and Beijing right now. They want to see a destabilized America. They want to see a chaotic America. They want to see a democracy that's flailing, and they'll continue to do this until they get their man in power or their woman in power, whoever it might be, in the next round of elections, because that's what they've told us they want to do. I mean, that's what they did last time. And then they'll just stop democracy, as they wanted to try and do on January the 6th. They're just going to stop democracy from happening, as they've shown us they wanted to do on January the 6th last year. So this is not a party interested in the people. This is a party interested in the crime that's attached to their activities and the crime and the money they can make. The middlemaning and the schemes that they've concocted in order to make themselves some money along the way, while Beijing and Moscow, try to weaken American interests around the world. They haven't succeeded in doing that, but that's what they're trying to do. And there's pleading, as we've been seeing people pleading with the GOP to be different. GOP is not going to be different. GOP is not going to be different.
We've been covering the Sussman case, right? And there's little, news tidbits like Kevin Spacey got hit with 3 or 4 charges of sexual assault in the UK, and he used to fly around with Jeffrey Epstein and what's his name, Bill Clinton.
Yeah, that guy.
And I know some of my more liberal followers get a little upset that they thought that I was I wasn't just opposed to corruption and treason, but that they were kind of hoping that I was part of their partisan dream of just hating on Republicans. And they get upset when I point out felonies that do not matter what party they are. But here's the thing. Asking the GOP to be better is hilarious to me. It's like they're gone. They those days are gone.
Those days are gone. They're not going to happen. And we need a new party. We need an alternative for people to vote in the red states, because they're not going to vote for Democrats. They don't trust Democrats. But there is a potential for another party, or maybe there are Democrats that can, change the image of the Democratic Party. But we certainly need to give voters in those states an alternative they can feel comfortable voting for.
Start a new party. I mean, it's, we don't have Whigs around anymore.
Yeah.
The Democratic Republicans of Madison and Jefferson, they're gone. That's,
to start something.
We
new.
have parties, parties live and die. That's okay. And there's a big hole open for, look, I think the bifurcation of American politics, George Washington in his resignation address when he left after 2 terms, he warned everybody about partisanship, and I think he was right. But that's the way the game is played now. There's 2 parties, and I think the idea of having kind of more of, if you take George Lakoff's cognitive models of what the parties offer, that ideally the Democratic Party is offering more of a nurturing, mothering figure, and the Republican Party is ideally more of a strict, standards upholding, father-like figure. That's ideally. Now, in reality, Dad is on crack and is sleeping in the ditch. After parting with the Sinaloa cartel. It's pretty bad. The Dems have their own problems. But that idea, we're going to have 2 parties that, represent the human mind and a little bit different. And so that you can, I kind of like this set of policies more. I like that set of policies more. I don't think a 2-party system's bad. But I think if one is, taking money from the NRA that's really come from the Russian mafia, I think that party needs to go away. That's just me.
This should go away.
Let's ask the viewers out
in Canada.
here.
We have 5. We have 5 parties, and it's only 30 million people. So there's 300 million in the United States.
And which are those?
you want to know the five party, the New Democrats, the,
Yes.
the
The
Liberals, the
NDP.
Conservatives, the Green Party, and what did I leave out?
Le Parti Québécois.
Okay, sorry, the BQ, sorry, the BQ, Bloc Québécois.
Le Bloc Québécois. C'est
Yeah,
ça.
you're so good. You know your Canadian politics, which I pay very little attention to because I'm so busy focusing on American politics. There's one thing, there's two things I want to share before we leave. One is a story that is not leaving my mind. Someone sent it to me the other day, and it reports that in you won't be able to read this very clearly, but maybe you will. It reports that I'm going to pull it up here 1 second. That in 2018, Columbine-inspired teens planned a mass shooting at a Uvalde middle school. So same town, different school, but planned a shooting. They were aged 13 and 14. You know, the date they planned it for was their graduation year, which was April 20th, 2022, which is a month ago, a few weeks ago. The anniversary of Columbine is when they planned it for. They were arrested and have gone and have been dealt with in the system there. But it would not have been the first time that Uvalde had to deal with this school shooting the last few days, as they've had to deal with the possibility of that for a few years now. And on top of that, how weird is it that it was same month basically? The shooting it does actually take place, and that this was planned 5 years ago. By these 13 and 14-year-olds. I mean, that seems to me, that's weird.
Something's up there.
Yeah, it seems strange.
I mean, yeah. I think there's a lot of stuff with the Department of Homeland Security knows some stuff they can't talk about.
Yeah. People, really
this doesn't seem fully organic. Because there are countries that have more weapons. Okay, nobody outside like Afghanistan, has as many firearms as the United States. But there are countries that have lots more guns, where somebody cuckoo can arm themselves and go out in the public, but they don't.
You know where this did happen? All this really happened in South Africa. Very similar. Trend in violence happened towards the end of South Africa apartheid. As things were beginning to be crystal clear that Nelson Mandela was going to be the president, and that the ANC were going to be in power, that racism was over in this country, which was a huge watershed moment that every person I knew, black, white, or any other race, was thrilled about. I mean, there was just this excitement about we were going to take on the future, and we're going to have a whole new way of operating because we finally got rid of this horrible system that we had.
Sure.
That voting day in 1994 was remarkable. People really. There was no violence on that day. People were peaceful, calm. They just did what they needed to do. But after it became clear that this was the case, there was suddenly this incredible spree of crime that suddenly emerged out of nowhere. No one had expected it. No one expected the carjackings and the sudden crimes on the suburbs, and no one really understood where it came from, because there was sort of unanimous agreement that this was going to be a good thing. We had agreed. Yeah, great. You guys got. There's no racism. Everyone gets to do whatever. But suddenly, this crime spree emerged, and they were carjacking cars, and the cars were being sold into the international market, and no one really understood how that was happening, because that's like a organized effort, right? I mean, you have to steal them, you have to ship them. I don't know how it works, but it requires a lot of that. And at the time, all you could think about was the crime spree. And as you point out, people in their ordinary lives just wanted to leave South Africa because they just had enough of the crime. No one wants to live in a crime spree. No one wants to live in a world where they're getting shot at, or, it was far more peaceful under apartheid for everybody, it just turned out. So what happened during that period when everyone was so happy and so euphoric? Why did some people decide to suddenly launch a crime spree? It's a really good question. And why did the police find themselves so ineffective in stopping it? Why were they the ones who couldn't stop the crime spree? Because it was evident, you could see it everywhere. It was happening to a lot of people. Why was no one being arrested? Why was it not stopped? And so you land up with this idea of an organized crime element happening in the country that was taking advantage of the change. But they were not only taking advantage of this change because they wanted to have crime. They were taking advantage of the change so they could do more criming. Because while all of this was going on and everyone's freaking out about the chaos and the crime and people dying, they were siphoning all the resources out of South Africa. They were basically stealing South Africa's, money, South Africa's resources. They were, setting up corruption in a way that had never been done before. They were perhaps even using companies like PayPal to take some of that money out of South Africa and launder it into the world. And, we now know that one of the people at PayPal, the guy who was one of the founders of PayPal, was the grandson of Pik Botha, the foreign minister in the South African apartheid regime. He was a nice guy to most people. He even stayed on under Mandela. But how is he?
Who's that?
One of the founders of PayPal in the PayPal mafia,
Which one was that?
Botha, is the grandson of Pik Botha of the apartheid regime, and was the foreign minister during that time. I met the guy. He was a really, for the apartheid people, he was the nicest of a lot of them. But he might have been involved in a scheme to, siphon some money out of South Africa at that time. Elon Musk, South African, also tied to potential illegal mining in Zambia. You got Peter Thiel, who happened to be in Mozambique at the time, also involved in mining. And Pik Botha landed up being the minister of mining under Mandela.
I get kind of a spy sense here. There's kind of some espionage kind of stuff.
Yeah, espionage and grand theft, because you're taking all the resources, mining money, and all this other stuff you can out of South Africa in order to really weaken South Africa. So the response to, we're going to have a racism-free country was, we're going to attack the economy, steal all the money, and create a crime wave that makes it impossible for you to live well. And that's continued to large extent until today.
Think of the resources in the rest of Africa, and if South Africa had come to its apex as what it could be with this, diversity and history, and all these strengths, if those strengths were allowed to come together, all these places that have bauxite, uranium, petroleum, rare woods, other rare earths, and people don't realize how big Africa is, or frankly, how badly Africa is like drawn on maps that give you an impression like it is small. It's smaller than it is. It is enormous and incredibly rich. And if you didn't have kleptocracies on there, well, then how would the Chinese, build a port or two and then steal all the stuff? And then
right. Countries like Israel have been pillaging African resources for the longest time. Diamond industry is basically stolen out of Angola to a large extent. I mean, this happens. It's not even something.
Dan Gertler, I believe.
Dan Gertler, but there's also he was friends with Mr. Trump.
Benny Steinmetz,
the Chabad guy. I forget his name. It'll come to me, but I can't remember his name right now. I'm sorry, but there's the big diamond guy in Israel, who also happens to have Chinese spy ties, is Mr.
No.
Is the guy who stole the diamonds from Angola. I mean, that's basically like it's not very hard to see once you just look at it. And so, you mentioned China's and Eric Prince is another company or another individual who has, interests in resource and flying resources and moving logistics around Africa for the Chinese. It's another person that's attached to this whole thing, which is interesting. But I digress. But my point is that as America enters this sort of point where it's come to the realization that we're going to be okay with each other. We're going to live in a non-racial democratic country, and we're going to be okay like that. Isn't it funny that they install this presidency that's become so offensive and crimey, that they introduce this horrendous crime wave, this inflation, this all these war, famine, climate change, and whatever it is that America's dealing with right now, all happening at a time when America's changing, with the demographics of the country were changing. With the demographics of the country were going to look different than the past, and white people are not going to be the majority or clear majority anymore. Just like in South Africa, where white people are not going to be in the power anymore, even though they were the minorities in South Africa. And you add to that the brain drain, and you've got a real problem that happens in countries. So,
And there's a saying in the futures trade, the future studies trade, that the only people out there that like change are wet babies.
mm-hmm.
It's a good line.
It's a good line. It's a really good line.
But who really don't like it? Criminals who've got criminal rackets going on. They don't like that at all.
And what's interesting? They will tell you to be scared of everybody else. They'll tell you to be scared of the black people. They'll tell you to be scared of the Muslims. They'll tell you to be scared of Jews. They'll tell you, whatever. Maybe that's not the right one, but they'll tell you that they'll blame everybody else and make sure that you're scared of absolutely every other thing. The liberals, those terrible Democrats, the communists, you name it. When in reality, the people that are causing the damage to the country, the people that are allowing those guns to be shot at kids, the people that are allowing Donald Trump to be president and let COVID come into the country, the people that are allowing the crime rackets and the child abuse that's going on in the country, the people that are allowing all this this organized crime, the people that are profiting off it, the people that are taking away your abortion rights, the people that are taking away your LGBTQ rights, the people that are taking away your rights to vote. That's not coming from the black people or the Muslim people. That's coming from the white people. That's coming from the GOP. Those are the people that are the threat to America. That's coming
from the money.
Yeah.
That's coming from the money. Because there is no GOP in the UK. There's no GOP in South Africa. The Gupta family are not Republicans, right?
Yeah.
They're real, the Guptas in South Africa.
Yeah.
Real trouble, right?
Real trouble. They stole the economy there too. But
they're not GOP. They're just crooks. So,
but the comparison with South Africa at the time is, the threat came from in terms of who stole the money out of South Africa, who took the money, was the apartheid regime took the money. It's not that the money disappeared after the apartheid regime. They stole the money on the way out the door. They were, they made the deal. They said, okay, fine, we'll give you, we'll end apartheid, but we're gonna take the money with us. And they left the country to a large extent.
Sounds like some of it made its way to South Africa or to Silicon Valley.
Sounds like it did. It seems like a lot of it came to Silicon Valley, which is why, we call them the PayPal mafia. It's a reason.
It may not be a jaunty metaphor. It may be.
It may
more of a direct comparison.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think it very much is, and why we spend so much time talking about Elon Musk and Peter Thiel on the show is because. It's because exactly that reason. Thanks, Eric. This is an impromptu show. This is not what we had planned to do tonight, but we will do the show we were planning to do with Elon Musk in the coming weeks. But we just had to do
he's
this.
Not coming on. We came this close to getting. We almost had some Flynns on here. But if Elon wants to talk, I mean, heck.
Hey, the Flints want to come on. I just don't know. Maybe the audience can help us decide if we should interview Joe Flynn.
I want Mike. Mike, if you're out there, let's talk about the software you used in Afghanistan and how it was usful in 2016.
I mean, Mike Flynn and Joe Flynn are connected at the hip, so
Well, that's Mike I want to talk to.
What about Roger Stone? Would you talk to Roger Stone?
Sure. I mean, why not? Let's have a chat. I'll chat with everybody. I
would too, but I don't know. You guys tell us whether we should interview these people. Would you be, Joe Flynn, Roger Stone? Should they become available? Would you be interested in hearing?
Paul Manafort. Paul, is he back in ostrich jackets? I mean, he's like the one guy I have respect for because he's like, I'm a mobster.
I mean, look, I'd be fascinated to talk to these people, if they would talk to us, because that's what journalists are meant to do. We're meant to talk to people on all sides, get ideas. But these days in Twitter world, it becomes hard to navigate sometimes. So, but I personally feel like it's important to hear everybody. If we don't hear everybody, we'll never ever solve the problems in this country.
Here's something for the audience out there. A lot of the characters that you've seen pop up in media and that are playing bad guys or maybe playing good guys. They oftentimes represent another powerful interest. And, as the whole kind of game comes apart and the masks come off, we might want to talk to some of these people who seem to be bad guys and go, well, what were you really doing there? How do you feel about that? How'd you start out? Because, I think this is where we came in at. We were talking about the January 6th hearings. Again, all my sources say there's some real flamethrower stuff coming out, and we're going to have much in the way that South Africa did at post-Apartheid, we have a chance to look at this and go, what just happened here? Because I think we're going to hear some stories about something pretty serious. It's going to scare us all into the moment. It's going to focus us onto what's happening, and we should keep these lines of dialogue open to go what, because I think there's a lot of my friend is coming out with an essay called "The Hackable System of Good Intentions," and that there's a lot of people who start out with really good ideas and they get taken over by malign actors and whatnot. And you're not as cynical as hostile intelligence services and whatnot, and you end up in a place you didn't intend to be. There's going to be a lot of people who followed one ideology or another, who are good people who didn't intend to hurt folks. There's also a bunch of monsters and creeps and criminals out there. We just want them to go to prison and go away. But for the rest of us, we might have been thin sliced by Facebook and different algorithms out into not talking to each other. But, if people started as good folks and got, detoured, maybe we need to get back to talking to each other and go, well, what just happened there? Because we have been subjects, all of us, to like the greatest unlicensed, consent-free psychological experiment in human history.
Absolutely.
On these little computer devices.
Absolutely. We're under attack every second of the day because of this in psychological warfare and the psyop that's been, and the damages, it's going to be untold. The damage is going to be untold for generations. But we shall prevail, as they say. And on that note, I should say that you can join us, our supporters, at patreon.com/narrative. We really rely on our patrons to support this program, and we can't do it without them. We thank them so much for helping us out on a regular basis, and we hope that you'll join us at patreon.com/narrative. We'll be back tomorrow night with...
I only have one more thing. May I tag this?
You can tag it away.
In our last episode, I made a challenge to China and Saudi
Yes.
to sanction me. And I'd just like to say, both of you, China, Saudi Arabia, you can kiss my ass. You're not man enough to sanction me.
Where are you, China?
But Russia
Where are
was.
you?
So are you going to be behind Russia?
Yeah. God, that standing line behind China. Come on.
It's pathetic. You guys can get it. Come on.
Do it.
You
Do
can
it. Sanction Eric. Everyone wants to
Do it
sanction
tonight.
Eric. Do it tonight. It'll help us by tomorrow morning. It'll really, really be helpful to us. So please do
It'll
it.
help
Sanction.
you. I'll never turn up in your country and bother you.
You're not planning any special trips to Macau or Beijing in the near future? No?
They have the annual smog festival that I was going to go to, but if they sanction me, I won't go. So
Macau has the longest life expectancy in the world, I found out the other day. And I was like, interesting. Must be good to be a mobster in China. On that note, sanction Eric by tomorrow, please. Saudi Arabia, please. China. Good night, everybody. Narrative is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative.